If you are watching this from inside Iran right now, and I know some of you are, with your VPNs and your quietly beating hearts, I want you to know something before I say another word. I see you, and so does he. The room smelled like bleach and cardamom. That combination, I will never forget it as long as I live. Bleach, because they had cleaned something off the floor before I arrived. I chose not to think about what. Cardamom, because there was a glass of chai sitting on the metal table in front of me, poured with careful precision, steam curling upward in the cold air like a question mark. He set it there himself, the man across the table, tall, 50s, a gray beard trimmed with unusual neatness, reading glasses pushed up on his forehead like a university professor. He wore civilian clothes, a dark button-up shirt, no tie. But I could see the shape of the IRGC, the SEPA, the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, in the way he held his body, like a man who had never once been told no. His name, he told me, was Brother Karimi. Not colonel, not commander. Brother. The Sepa's intelligence division, the people who run Ward 209 of Evin Prison, Iran's most notorious detention center, they like to use that word. Brother. It is part of the Taraf, the extraordinary Persian art of courtesy. You must understand something about Iranian culture if you want to understand what happened in that room. We are a civilization that perfected hospitality 3,000 years before the birth of the Islamic Republic. Taraf runs in our blood. You offer tea. You say Gorbunet Daaram, may I be sacrificed for you, as a term of endearment. You compliment a man's family before you reach across the table and end his life. Brother Karimi smiled at me and said, "Please, the chai will get cold. Your mother makes hers with more cardamom, yes? I can tell you have a mother who takes pride in her kitchen." He knew my mother's name. He had been inside her kitchen. Metaphorically, or perhaps literally, I would never know. Then the smile stayed exactly the same, and he said, "Tell me who gave you the Bible. Give me the names of everyone in your group, and we can have you home before Azan, before the evening call to prayer. Your mother won't even worry." The fluorescent light above us flickered once. The hum changed pitch, just barely, like a note sliding flat on a string instrument. I remember thinking, in that strange clarity that only mortal terror produces, this is the most Persian moment of my life. Exquisite courtesy wrapped around existential threat like rosewater poured over a blade. I did not touch the tea. I looked at the tape recorder. I looked at my hands, which were not shaking. And I was surprised by that, the way you are surprised by small dignities when everything else has been taken. And I thought, how did I get here? You want to know how a person ends up in a chair like that? So do I. Because 6 months before that flickering light and that untouched glass of chai, I had never held a Bible. I had never spoken the name of Jesus, of Isa al-Masih, except to confirm what my teacher told me in school, that he was a prophet, a good man, but not the Son of God, and certainly not worth dying for. I was a good Shia Muslim. I prayed 5 times a day, facing Mecca, forehead to the prayer mat, the words of the Fatiha so deep in my bones I could recite them in my sleep. I fasted every Ramadan, 30 days, not one date passed my lips before the evening azan. I wept at Ashura, the holiest mourning day of the Shia calendar, walking in the streets with thousands of others, beating my chest for Imam Hussein, the tears completely real, the grief completely sincere. My name is Dariush. I was a son of Persia, a child of the revolution, born into the Islamic Republic, shaped by it, fluent in its language, loyal to its God. And I had absolutely no idea that the God I was about to meet, the real one, the living one, had been calling my name in my own language for my entire life. Before I tell you about the prison, I need to tell you about the home, because here is what most Westerners get wrong about Iran, about the Persian world. When they see it filtered through news headlines and political speeches, they forget that before it was a headline, it was a home, a real one. With the smell of saffron rice on Friday afternoons and a grandmother who pressed your face between her hands and said, "Junam, my soul, my darling," like your existence was the finest thing that had ever happened to her. My father was an engineer. My mother taught primary school. We lived in a 3-bedroom apartment in a middle-class neighborhood in Tehran, not far from the Dariush Bazaar in the north of the city, where the mountains are close enough on clear days that you feel you could reach out and touch the snow on the peaks. We were not wealthy. We were not poor. We were, by every measure of the Islamic Republic, a good family, meaning devout, educated, obedient, and quiet. Religion in Iran is not a Sunday activity. You must understand this. It is the architecture of everything. It is the school curriculum, the marriage contract, the business law, the calendar, the news broadcast, the texture of public space. You do not choose to be Muslim in the Islamic Republic the way an American might choose a church, casually, personally, on a voluntary Sunday morning. You are Muslim the way you are Iranian. It is woven into your identity at the cellular level before you are old enough to question it. Shia Islam, and this is important for my American friends to understand, is not the same as Sunni Islam, which is what most of the Muslim world practices. We Shia are the minority, but in Iran, we are the state. Our faith is built around tragedy, around love, around the figure of Imam Hussein, the grandson of the Prophet, who was massacred at the Battle of Karbala in 680 AD. Every year at Ashura, the entire country mourns. Not symbolically, actually mourns, in the streets, in the thousands, beating chests, weeping, reciting elegies in voices that crack with genuine grief. I have cried at Ashura more times than I can count. That grief was real. That love was real. I want you to hold that. Because what happened to me later was not a story of someone who rejected a hollow religion. It was the story of someone who loved God deeply, sincerely, and then discovered that God was bigger than the box they had been handed. But that discovery was still years away. First, there was the life. I was a good student. I loved poetry. That is perhaps the most Persian thing I can tell you about myself. In Iran, we do not quote politicians the way Americans do. We quote poets. Hafez, Rumi, Sa'adi. My father could recite 20 pages of the Shahnameh, Ferdowsi's epic of ancient Persia, from memory. In our culture, a man who knows his poetry is a man who knows himself. I was proud of that inheritance. I still am. But somewhere in the architecture of that beautiful, devout, poetic life, there was a crack, and it appeared on a specific day, in a specific mosque, when I was 17 years old. Our local imam was delivering the Friday sermon, the khutbah. He was speaking about purity, about the enemies of Islam, about the duty of every believer to guard the faith. And then a man in the congregation, a merchant from our street, a man I had known my whole life, a man who had given me candy as a child, stood up and asked a careful, respectful question about a verse he did not understand. The imam stopped. The room went cold in a way that had nothing to do with temperature. And I watched the imam look at this gentle merchant, this man of ta'aruf, this man of courtesy and dates and candy, and dismiss him with a sentence that I will not repeat here, but which contained within it the clear message: questions are not faith. Questions are danger. The merchant sat down. He pressed his lips together. He did not look up for the rest of the prayer. I went home that afternoon and ate my mother's saffron rice and said nothing, but something in me had shifted, not broken, not yet, just moved, the way a stone moves imperceptibly at the edge of a cliff. That night, I lay in bed listening to the azan drift from 3 different minarets across the city, their calls overlapping slightly, not quite in unison, a sound I had heard every single night of my life. And for the first time I thought a thought I had never permitted myself before. What if my questions are not weakness? What if they are the most honest thing about me? I did not know yet where that question would lead. I had no idea it would lead me to a name I barely knew, a book I had never read, and a room with a flickering fluorescent light and an untouched glass of chai. But that was the first crack. And once a crack appears in the right wall, no amount of obedience can seal it. It started, as so many dangerous things in Iran do, with a satellite dish hidden under a water tank on the roof. You have to understand the geography of information in the Islamic Republic. The regime controls the television. It controls the radio. It controls the newspapers, the textbooks, the Friday sermons, the algorithm of the national internet, which we call the intranet, not the internet, because what they give you is not the world. It is a walled garden designed to look like the world. But Iranians are, by nature and by centuries of practice, a people who find the door in every wall. And so, quietly, defiantly, on rooftops across Tehran and Isfahan and Shiraz and Mashhad, there are satellite dishes, illegal, technically, officially forbidden, pointing at the sky like small acts of prayer. My cousin Reza installed one on our building when I was 19. He was that kind of person, brilliant, reckless, laughing at consequences in that particularly Persian way that is equal parts courage and poetry. "What are they going to do?" he said, adjusting the angle with a screwdriver. "Arrest the sky?" Through that dish, late at night with the volume low, I discovered a world of television that the Republic had not curated for me. News programs, films, music. And one night, flipping through channels at 2 in the morning when I could not sleep and my questions had grown too loud to ignore, I landed on a Persian language Christian broadcast. I almost changed the channel. My hand was on the remote. But the man speaking was Iranian. I could tell immediately, not just from the Farsi, but from the cadence, the way educated Iranians pace their sentences, the particular music of a Tehran accent. And he was talking about the Quran. He was talking about a figure in the Quran that I had always been taught was minor, peripheral, a footnote prophet. He was talking about Isa, and he said something that stopped my hand on the remote completely. He said, "Did you know that in the Quran, Isa al-Masih, Jesus the Messiah, is born of a virgin, speaks from the cradle as an infant, heals the blind, raises the dead, and ascends to heaven alive? Did you know the Quran calls him Kalimatullah, the Word of God? Did you know that in the Quran, unlike any other prophet, Isa is given the title Masih, the Messiah, without explanation, without qualification? Has anyone ever told you what that word means? Has anyone ever asked you why?" I sat with that for 3 days. I am a Persian. We do not make decisions quickly when they matter. We sit with them. We turn them over like a stone in the hand, examining every surface. I was raised on Hafez, who wrote that the truth is a wine that takes a lifetime to pour. I was not going to rush. But on the 4th night, I opened my laptop, glanced at the door to make sure it was closed, and typed 2 words into a search engine I had accessed through a VPN, one of the proxy tools Iranians use to climb over the regime's digital walls. Injil Farsi, the Persian Gospel. What came back changed everything. There was an app, a free one. The entire Bible, in Farsi, not a translation that felt foreign or imported, but one that read with the rhythm of our own language, the language of Hafez and Rumi and my grandmother's bedtime stories. I downloaded it in 30 seconds. I deleted the browser history immediately after. Then I opened the app with hands that were, for the first time, actually shaking. I went to the Gospel of John because the man on the television had mentioned it, and I read the first verse. "In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God." In Farsi, "Dar ibtada kalam bud, wa kalamu nazid khuda bud, wa kalamu khuda bud." I sat back. Kalimatullah, the Word of God, the Quran's own title for Isa. And here, in this book I had been taught was corrupted, was a Jew from 1st century Galilee being introduced with the exact same title, not as a description, but as an identity, as a name. I am a Persian. My civilization invented algebra, mapped the stars, gave the world its first declaration of human rights under Cyrus the Great, 6 centuries before the birth of Christ. I do not say this with arrogance. I say it because I need you to understand that what happened next was not the conversion of an uneducated or desperate man. It was the conclusion of a rigorous, reluctant, deeply personal intellectual investigation conducted by someone who was, by instinct and by heritage, deeply resistant to being told what to think. I kept reading, night after night. John, then Matthew, then Luke. I read about the Sermon on the Mount. Blessed are the meek, for they shall inherit the earth. And I thought of Hafez, who wrote that the true king is the one who has conquered his own soul. I read about the prodigal son and wept quietly in the dark, because I recognized the father in that story. I had felt that father's gaze in the mosque as a child before I had learned to be afraid of questions. And then I found it. The verse that I became convinced, in some chamber of my heart that I cannot fully explain in any language, was written specifically for me. John 7:37. Jesus stands in the temple courts and cries out, "If anyone is thirsty, let him come to me and drink." I had been thirsty my entire life. I had drunk from every vessel the Republic offered me. Prayer, fasting, ideology, poetry, obedience, and I had remained thirsty. I had stood in the mosque and beaten my chest for Imam Hussein, and felt the grief rise in me like floodwater, and then subside, and then return the next day still thirsty. I had memorized the Fatiha and the Ayat al-Kursi and 100 other verses, and recited them until they were smoother than river stones in my mouth, and I had remained thirsty. And here was a man from Nazareth, 2,000 years dead, standing in a crowded courtyard and saying, in Farsi, in my language, on my phone screen at 2 a.m. with the Tehran smog pressing against my window, "Come to me." Every night I deleted my browser history. Every morning I downloaded the app again. I told myself I was only investigating. I told myself a scholar examines all sources. I told myself Hafez himself had written poems that sounded almost Christian if you read them in a certain light. And that is not even a stretch. Scholars have argued it for centuries. But the truth was simpler and more terrifying than any intellectual justification. I couldn't stop. It was like drinking water after a lifetime of thirst. And somewhere in the city, someone had noticed my satellite dish, or my search history, or the way I had started closing my bedroom door. It was my brother who found it. Not a government agent, not a base-age informant, not yet. It was Mehdi, my younger brother by 3 years, 20 years old, still living at home, studying engineering at Amir Kabir University. Mehdi, who used to steal my football when we were children and then look me directly in the eye and deny it with such complete conviction that I almost believed him. Mehdi, who knew every expression on my face the way only a sibling can. The way only someone who grew up 3 meters away from you, breathing the same apartment air, eating from the same pot of saffron rice, can know another person. He had borrowed my phone to make a call. That was all. A simple, ordinary, 2-minute loan of a phone between brothers on a Tuesday morning. He found the app because I had not deleted it the night before. I had fallen asleep reading. John chapter 14. I am the way and the truth and the life. The words still glowing on the screen when Mehdi picked it up. He didn't say anything that morning. He handed the phone back, without looking at me. He drank his tea. He ate his bread. And I, God help me, did not notice. I was tired from the night before, distracted by the residue of what I had been reading, and I missed the silence that had changed texture between us like water dropping a degree below freezing. Still liquid, but not for long. It was 3 days later. I came home from the university in the late afternoon. The azan was drifting from the neighborhood mosque, that sound I had heard every day of my life, now carrying a different weight, because I had started hearing it differently, the way you hear a familiar song differently after someone tells you what the lyrics actually mean. My mother was in the kitchen. The smell of gourmet sabzi, the herb stew that is, in my opinion, the finest argument for the existence of a loving God that Persian cuisine has ever produced, filled the apartment. My father was sitting in the living room. He was not reading. He was not watching television. He was sitting in his chair with his hands on his knees, which is how my father sat when he was composing himself, when he was building the architecture of something he needed to say. Mehdi was standing by the window. He did not look at me when I walked in. My mother appeared in the kitchen doorway. She looked at my father. She did not look at me. The gourmet sabzi was burning slightly. Nobody moved to turn down the gas. My father said very quietly, "Beshin pasaram." "Sit down, my son." I sat. He placed my phone on the table between us. The Bible app was open. I had bookmarked the Sermon on the Mount. The silence lasted perhaps 10 seconds. In my family, in Persian culture broadly, silence is never empty. It is a language of its own, layered, weighted, carrying everything that cannot yet be said aloud. Then my father spoke, and what he said was not what I expected. He said, "Man midunam ki to adami bahushi hasty." I know you are an intelligent person. That was the Tarof. Even then, even in that moment, the Tarof came first, the courtesy before the wound. I almost smiled. I almost cried. Then he said, "Paschera dari kodetova maronabut mikoni?" So why are you destroying yourself and us? Not you are wrong. Not you are sinful. The first instinct of a Persian father is not theology. It is family. It is the collective. Us. The unit. The name. The honor that is not personal but communal, woven through every relationship, every neighborhood, every Friday at the mosque where people see your family and form their conclusions. I said, "Baba, man faqat Daaram mikhunam." Father, I am only reading. He looked at me the way fathers look at sons when they know they are being told a half-truth dressed in the clothing of a reasonable sentence. Mehdi spoke then, still at the window, still not looking at me. "Chand hafte hekedari in karomikoni. You've been doing this for weeks." What followed was not a single confrontation, but a slow, painful unraveling that took the rest of that evening and most of the night. My father alternated between cold anger and something closer to grief. My mother wept in the kitchen, quietly, with the dignity of a woman who had learned that some pain is too private for the living room. Mehdi said very little after his initial accusation, but his silence had the quality of a verdict. They did not hit me that night. I want you to understand that. My father was not a violent man. He was a frightened one. And in the Islamic Republic, fear looks very similar to anger, because fear without power becomes anger almost immediately. He said the words I had been dreading without fully knowing I had been dreading them. Agar in karo edame bedi, majboram kodamo hefskonam. If you continue this, I will be forced to protect myself. In Iran, that sentence has a specific meaning that it would not have in America. Protecting himself did not mean locking me out of the house. It did not mean cutting off my inheritance. It meant reporting me to the mosque, to the Basij, the neighborhood paramilitary force that functions as the regime's eyes and ears in every apartment building, every street, every family gathering. It meant handing his own son to a system that had a specific legal category for what I was becoming. Because in Iran, leaving Islam is not a private spiritual matter. It is a crime. It has a name in the Islamic Penal Code. Article 167, irtidad, apostasy. For a man, death. For a woman, imprisonment until she recants. My countdown, though I did not know it yet, had already begun. It was not my father who made that call. I believe that with everything in me. I think he spent 3 days arguing with himself. 3 days of gourmet sabzi going cold on the table and my mother's eyes getting quieter and quieter. And in those 3 days, someone else moved faster. The Basij had a representative in our building, a man named Gassam. 50s, heavyset, always in the same gray jacket, always carrying prayer beads, tasbih, the amber kind, clicking them between his thick fingers in the elevator, in the courtyard, on the stairs. I had known him my whole life. He had attended my secondary school graduation. He had eaten my mother's rice. He had also, I learned later, been watching our rooftop satellite dish for 2 years. I was arrested on a Wednesday morning. 2 men, plain clothes, a white Peugeot with no plates, the signature vehicle of Iranian intelligence operations, so well known in Tehran that when you see one parked on your street, your stomach drops before your brain catches up. They were polite. That was the worst part. Perfectly, exquisitely, devastatingly polite. One of them, younger, perhaps 30, with the careful eyes of someone trained to notice everything, held the building door open for my mother as she came down the stairs with her shopping bag. He smiled at her. She smiled back, not knowing. Then he turned to me and said, almost gently, "Bifarmayid. Please come." Bifarmayid. One of the most beautiful words in the Farsi language. It means, "Please go ahead. After you. Be my honored guest." It is what you say when you open a door for someone, when you invite them to your table, when you offer them the first piece of bread, when you put them in the back of a white Peugeot and drive them to a place from which some people never return. In Iran, leaving Islam isn't just a sin, it's a crime. Article 167 of the Islamic Penal Code, apostasy. For a man, death. For a woman, imprisonment until you return. My countdown had begun, and the car smelled like cigarettes and rosewater air freshener. And outside the window, Tehran moved past me like a film of a city I was watching for the last time. The Alborz Mountains, white-capped and indifferent in the north, a vendor selling pomegranates on the corner, a child chasing a football across a side street. All of it ordinary, all of it luminous, all of it already becoming memory. There is a particular silence inside Evin Prison that I have never heard anywhere else on earth. It is not the silence of peace. It is not even the silence of emptiness. It is the silence of thousands of human beings learning, over days and weeks and sometimes years, to make themselves as small and as quiet as possible. Because sound draws attention, and attention in Evin is almost never a good thing. It is the silence of people who still exist, but have learned to exist less. I want to be precise with you, because precision is the only dignity I have left to offer this story. I was not taken to Ward 209 immediately. That is the solitary confinement section run by IRGC intelligence, the place whose name alone causes experienced Iranian political prisoners to go quiet when you mention it. I was taken first to a holding facility, a gray building in western Tehran that smelled like all gray buildings in all countries where governments decide that some of their citizens have thought the wrong thoughts. I was held there for 9 days before my transfer. 9 days. I want you to hold that number for a moment, because it sounds manageable until you understand what 9 days means in a place where you have no window, no clock, no phone, no book, no visitor, no information, and no way to know whether the people who love you know where you are. They took my watch in the first hour. This is standard. Time is a weapon. And in the system, the interrogators keep all the weapons. Brother Karimi, the man I described at the beginning of this story, the one with the reading glasses and the cardamom chai and the professor's posture, was not the first person to question me. The first was younger, perhaps 28. He had a thin beard and a habit of clicking his pen that I became convinced, by the third session, was deliberate. A metronome of low-grade irritation designed to erode concentration. He never gave me his name. He asked the same questions in slightly different sequences, session after session, the way you test a wall for the specific point at which the pressure will find a crack. Who gave you the Bible? How long have you been meeting with these people? Are you in contact with foreigners? Americans? Israelis? Who in your family knows? Your brother? Is he involved also? That last one. That last one was the chisel they used most, because every answer I gave about myself was, to me, an acceptable risk. I had made a choice. I was prepared, or I believed I was prepared, to bear the weight of that choice. But Mehdi, my brother, who had only borrowed a phone to make a call, my father, whose only crime was producing a son who asked too many questions, my mother, whose gourmet sabzi was still burning on the stove somewhere in the real world while I sat in a room with no windows and a pen clicking like a slow heartbeat. The psychological architecture of the system is sophisticated in ways that I think most Westerners would find surprising. These are not uneducated men operating on instinct. They are trained. They understand human attachment. They understand that the most effective lever is not the threat to the person in the chair. It is the threat to the people that person loves and has left, without explanation, in a city full of white Peugeots and amber prayer beads. On the fourth night, they played audio through a speaker in my cell. My mother's voice, A phone call, recorded. She was speaking to my aunt, and she was saying, in the particular broken register of a woman who has not slept and is trying very hard not to say the things she is saying, that she did not know where I was. That my father had gone to 3 different offices and been told 3 different things. That Mehdi was not eating. I pressed my back against the cold concrete wall, and I pulled the gray blanket around me, and I made a decision, in that moment, that I would not give them the satisfaction of the sound of me breaking. That was a decision I had to remake approximately every 40 minutes for the rest of that night. By day 6, I understood something about myself that I had not known before. I had always believed in the abstract that I was a person of a certain courage. I had admired, in history books and poetry, the great figures who held their convictions against impossible pressure. Hallaj, the Sufi mystic who was executed in Baghdad for saying, "An al-Haq," I am the truth, and who reportedly smiled at his executioners. I had thought, yes, I understand that. I am made of similar material. Day 6 taught me that I was not. Or rather, it taught me that courage is not a fixed quantity you possess like height or eye color. It is something that depletes. It is a resource that the system is specifically designed to exhaust. And by day 6, the resource was running very low. They brought me a form on day 7. Printed. Official. The letterhead of the Ministry of Intelligence. It was, in essence, a recantation document. A written declaration that I had been misled, that I rejected any engagement with non-Islamic materials, that I affirmed the Shahada, La ilaha illallah, Muhammadun Rasulullah. There is no God but God, and Muhammad is his messenger. One sentence, one signature, and the door, the young interrogator implied with the smile of a man offering a reasonable transaction, would open. I want to be honest with you. Completely honest. Because this story is worth nothing if I perform a courage I did not feel. I looked at that form for a long time. I looked at it the way a drowning man looks at a piece of wood that he is not entirely certain will hold his weight, but which is, undeniably, the only piece of wood available. I thought about my mother's voice through the speaker. I thought about Mehdi not eating. I thought about John 14. I am the way and the truth and the life. And I thought, if he is the truth, then this signature is a lie, and I have not come this far to sign my name to a lie. I pushed the form back across the table. The young interrogator looked at me for a long moment. The pen clicking stopped. And then he picked up the form, straightened it against the table edge with the precise movements of a man filing something for later, and left without another word. 2 days later, I was transferred to Evin, Ward 209. If you have read accounts of Evin Prison, and I hope after watching this that you will know that Ward 209 is the section controlled not by the regular prison administration, but by IRGC intelligence directly. It is where political and ideological cases go. It is where the ceiling feels lower, and the silence has a different quality. More intentional, more curated, like the silence is itself part of the sentence. My cell there was smaller. The blanket was thinner. The drain in the floor was older. Through the wall, on my second night, I heard someone reciting psalms in a whisper so quiet it was almost subvocal. Just the shape of syllables, more breath than voice. I did not know who it was. I never found out. But in that moment, that barely audible thread of ancient poetry through a concrete wall was the most beautiful sound I had heard since my mother's voice. Even though that voice had been played to break me, someone was in here. Someone had been in here before me. And they were still reciting psalms. I was given 48 hours, Brother Karimi told me. Now finally, this is where we return to that room. That chai. That flickering light. 48 hours to make my decision. Return to Islam, formally, documented, witnessed, or face the full application of Article 167. He said it with the measured tone of a man reading a train schedule. Then he poured fresh chai into my glass, because the first had gone cold, and he pushed it toward me with the particular gesture of Iranian hospitality. Bifarmayid, please, help yourself, tire off. Even here, even now. Courtesy before cruelty, all the way to the end. I returned to my cell. I sat on the metal cot. The overhead light hummed its permanent, seasonless hum. And I did the only thing left to me that was entirely mine, that they could not record or confiscate or use against my family. I prayed, not toward Mecca, not in the direction the Republic had always pointed me, not with my forehead on a clay tablet and the words of the Fatiha smooth as river stones in my mouth. I prayed to Jesus, out loud, in Farsi, for the first time in my life, with no one listening but God and the concrete walls of Ward 209. And the walls? I know this sounds like metaphor, but I mean it as literal description. The walls felt different afterward. Not warmer exactly, not lighter, but different in the way a room feels different when someone you love has just walked in before you have even turned around to see them. I did not know yet what was coming. I only knew that 48 hours had begun, and I was no longer counting them alone. I need to stop here and say something directly to you. If you are a Western Christian watching this, someone who grew up in a country where you could put a Bible on your nightstand and a cross above your door and a fish sticker on your car without once feeling the specific gravity of genuine danger, I need you to slow down for what I'm about to tell you. Not because you won't believe me, but because I think sometimes the miracle gets summarized too quickly, reduced to a talking point, flattened into a testimony soundbite, and then it loses the thing that makes it a miracle, which is its weight, its physical, specific, unrepeatable weight. And if you are watching this from inside Iran, from behind a VPN, in a locked room, with the volume low, then you already know the weight. You are living inside it right now. This chapter is especially for you. It was, by my body's estimate, somewhere between 2 and 4 in the morning. Without a clock, without a window, the body develops its own imprecise instruments, a heaviness behind the eyes, a particular quality of hunger, the way joints ache at their deepest hour. It was that hour, the hour when the system knows the mind is at its most permeable, its most undefended. I had been awake for what felt like 30 hours, perhaps more. I was past the stage of active fear and into something quieter and more dangerous, the stage where the self begins to feel optional, where the boundaries of who you are start to soften at the edges like a photograph left in water. I was not asleep when it happened. I need to be precise about this because I know what people think when they hear the word dream, and I know how the mind protects itself by reaching for natural explanations the way a falling man reaches for anything solid. I was not asleep. I was sitting on the cot with my back against the wall and my eyes open, staring at the drain in the floor, which had become in those long hours a kind of fixed point, the one thing in the room with enough visual specificity to anchor the mind to. The light changed, not the fluorescent tube, that continued its flat, institutional hum unchanged. Something beneath it, or behind it, or perhaps more accurately within the space itself began to carry a quality of luminance that I can only describe by comparison. You know the light in Isfahan in autumn? If you have been to Isfahan, you know exactly what I mean, and if you have not, I am sorry, because it is one of the most beautiful things this world contains. It is a golden, lateral light that comes in the late afternoon when the angle of the sun is low and the dust in the air is just fine enough to scatter it, and it falls on the blue tile of the mosques and the stone of the bridges and the water of the Zayande River, and everything it touches looks like it is lit from within, not from without, like the light is coming out of the objects themselves rather than falling on them. That was the quality. Isfahan in autumn, in a cell in Ward 209 of Evin Prison at 3 in the morning, with a drain in the floor and a gray blanket and 48 hours counting down to Article 167. And then the fragrance. I cannot tell you what it was with botanical precision. I can tell you what it reminded me of. My grandmother's courtyard in Shiraz. She had a small house with a courtyard garden, the kind of traditional Persian home that is built around a central outdoor space, and in that courtyard she grew roses and jasmine and something else I never identified, some small white flower that bloomed only in early summer and lasted perhaps 2 weeks. I have spent years since that night trying to find that fragrance in every garden, every market, every perfume. I have never found it. It existed in her courtyard and in that cell and nowhere else. The fragrance came first, then the warmth, Not temperature, exactly, but the sensation of warmth, like stepping from shadow into sunlight, except from the inside outward, beginning at the center of the chest and moving toward the extremities. And then, he was there. I will not try to describe his appearance in architectural detail, because I think those descriptions, when attempted, always fail. They become either too grand and therefore unbelievable, or too ordinary and therefore unsatisfying. What I will tell you is this. He was present in the way that very few things in a human life are truly present. Most things exist at a slight remove. You observe them, you process them, you file them. He was present the way pain is present, the way music is present when it catches you unguarded, the way your mother's voice is present when you hear it after a long silence and your body responds before your mind does. He was looking at me. And the looking, that is the thing I return to, again and again in the years since. The looking, not examining, not assessing, not the way Brother Karimi had looked at me across the metal table, cataloging, calculating, not the way the young interrogator had looked at me, measuring the distance between my resistance and my breaking point. He was looking at me the way, and I know this sounds too simple for what I am trying to say, but it is the most accurate language I have, the way you look at someone you love. When love has been established so thoroughly and for so long that the looking itself is a form of resting. When there is nowhere else you would rather be looking. And then he spoke. He spoke Farsi, not Arabic, the language of the Quran, the language of the formal prayers I had recited since childhood, the language that had always carried for me the quality of ritual, of distance, of a God who communicated through established channels and appointed intermediaries. Not English, the language of the satellite broadcasts, the language that always carried for an Iranian the slight aftertaste of geopolitical complexity. Farsi, my mother tongue, the language of my grandmother's courtyard, the language of Hafez and Rumi, and my father's memory of the Shahnameh, and the way my mother said Junam, my soul, when she held my face between her hands, the language I dreamed in, the language that lives in the part of the self that exists before education and ideology and official narrative, the language that the Islamic Republic had tried to fill every day of my life with its own content, and which now, for the first time, was being filled with something else entirely. He said, and he said it with the ease of someone saying a thing that has been true for longer than language has existed to say it. Dariush Midunum. Dariush, I know. He knew my name. Of course he knew my name. And yet the knowing of it, the saying of it in that voice, in that room, in that darkness that was no longer fully dark, undid me in a way that 48 hours of interrogation and 9 days of sleep deprivation and my mother's voice through a speaker had not managed to do. Something in my chest, something that had been braced and tensed and armored for so long that I had forgotten it was doing so, released. He said he knew. He said he knew the specific prayer I had prayed at 17 years old on the night after the imam had silenced the merchant in the mosque. The prayer I had prayed in secret, in language I had invented on the spot because I had no template for praying to a God whose name I hadn't yet learned. A private, formless, directionless prayer that I had spoken into the dark of my bedroom ceiling and had never told another human being, not Mehdi, not any of the people I would later come to know as brothers and sisters. He quoted it back to me. Not the words. I had not used precise words. The shape of it, the particular quality of longing in it. He described it the way you would describe a dream to the person who dreamed it. I cannot tell you what I felt in that moment without failing to tell you adequately. Every language is insufficient. In Persian, we have a word, hal, which is something like state or condition or the quality of inner being at a specific moment. The Sufi poets use it constantly. It is the technical vocabulary of divine encounter. Whatever hall I was in that cell, in that light, in that fragrance from my grandmother's courtyard, it was outside the range of anything the word was designed to measure. He said, and this is what I will carry in my body until the day I die, The sentence I have repeated to myself in every language I have since acquired. The sentence that is the fixed point of my entire existence. Azizam to Doost Daaram. My dear one, I love you. Azizam, my dear one, my precious one. The word a Persian mother uses for her child. The word that precedes every act of genuine tenderness in our culture. Not a formal word, an intimate one. Not a theological word, a household word. The word that belongs to kitchens and courtyards and the space between a parent's hands and a child's face. He used that word for me, in Ward 209, at 3 in the morning, with 48 hours counting down to a death sentence. And then, because he is not a God of vague comfort, but of specific instruction, he said something else. He told me that the guard who came to my cell at 3 in the morning, the one who made the last check before the shift change, a young man named something beginning with H, I would recognize him by the way he held his keys, would hesitate at my door. He told me that when that guard hesitated, I should say 3 words to him in Farsi through the door. 3 words. Manham Didaam. I also dreamed. He told me nothing else about what would happen after that. He gave me no guarantee of outcome. He gave me no roadmap. He gave me 3 words and a name I didn't know yet, and the warmth of being looked at by someone who knew every tear I had ever cried in silence since I was a child in Tehran, asking questions that no one would answer. Then, and this is the only theatrical element of the entire encounter, the one moment that resembles the version of this story I might have imagined before it happened to me. The light that was not the fluorescent tube, the warmth that was not temperature, the fragrance that was not jasmine but was the precise compound of jasmine, and something else that grew only in my grandmother's courtyard. Gently, without drama, without announcement, the way dawn comes in the mountains. Lifted. The cell was the same, the drain, the blanket, the hum, but I was not the same. And I will never be the same, and I do not want to be. I sat in the changed silence, and I held 3 words in my mouth like something precious. Manham Didaam. I also dreamed. He spoke my language. He knew my name. He knew every tear I had cried in silence since I was a child. He knew the prayer I had prayed into a bedroom ceiling at 17 years old and never repeated aloud to any living person. And he said, in the most beautiful Farsi I have ever heard, in a voice that sounded like what Hafez was reaching for in every poem he ever wrote, Azizam, to Doost Daaram. My dear one, I love you. 3 words in my pocket. A guard named something beginning with H. And for the first time since the white Peugeot and the pressurized door and the clicking pen and the amber prayer beads, I was not afraid. His name was Hamid. I did not know that yet. I knew only what I had been told, that he would hesitate. And so I sat in the changed silence of my cell, with 3 words pressed against the inside of my chest like a folded letter, and I waited. And I listened to the footsteps the way you listen to weather coming, tracking the distance, the pace, the angle, the specific rhythm of this particular set of keys among all the key sounds I had cataloged across my days in Ward 209. They stopped outside my door, not at the door before mine, not at the door after, outside mine. And there was a pause, longer than the routine check required, longer than the pause of a guard glancing through the slot to confirm a prisoner is present and accounted for. It was the pause of a person standing still, because something in them has stopped moving before their feet have received the instruction. I pressed my lips close to the door, not whispering, but not at full volume either, the middle register of a voice that wants to be heard by one person and no one else, and I said the 3 words, Manham Didaam. I also dreamed. The silence lasted perhaps 4 seconds. 4 seconds is nothing. 4 seconds is the time it takes to exhale completely. 4 seconds in that corridor was the length of a held universe. In the darkness ahead, a difference in the quality of the dark, a different country's darkness, lighter somehow, or perhaps just different in a way that a body knows before a mind can explain it. Turkey. I crossed it at approximately 3 in the morning. I stopped on the other side. The guide was already moving. He had a return journey to make, a business to continue, other people waiting on the Iranian side of the dark. He did not pause for ceremony, but I did. I stood in the snow, in the February mountain cold of eastern Turkey, and I did something I had not done since before the white Peugeot, since before Ward 209, since before the fluorescent tube and the metal table and the untouched chai and Brother Karimi's reading glasses and the form I had refused to sign. I said his name, not in a whisper, not with the practiced volume reduction of a man who has learned that certain sounds draw certain consequences, not with one ear monitoring the space around me for the response of a system that punishes the wrong words spoken aloud. I said, Isa al-Masih, Jesus the Messiah, at a normal human volume, into the February air of a free mountain, and the mountains did not report me to anyone, and the stars did not change, and no white Peugeot materialized from the darkness, and the only response was the wind, which is not nothing, which carries its own kind of answer for those who have learned to listen for it. From Turkey, Ankara, then Istanbul, then a flight arranged through the same network, documents that I will not detail, a refugee process that took 14 months and which I will compress here to a single sentence because 14 months of paperwork and waiting rooms and interviews and uncertainty, while important, is not the part of this story that I was asked to tell. I landed in a city in northern Europe on a morning in early spring. The airport was large and clean and full of people, moving with the particular purposeful ease of people who have places to be, and the unexamined confidence that they will be permitted to go to those places. I walked through the gate and into the arrivals hall, and I stopped. The floor was very clean. White tile, the kind of surface you find in places where cleaning is done, not out of fear of inspection but out of habit, out of the ordinary maintenance of an ordinary public space. I looked at it for a moment. Then I got down on my knees on the white tile of that arrivals hall. People looked. Of course they looked. A man in worn clothes getting down on his knees on an airport floor is not, in northern Europe, an ordinary sight. Some of them slowed. Some of them looked away with the careful respect of people who have learned not to stare at visible pain, not yet understanding that what they were looking at was not pain at all. I pressed my forehead to the white tile, and I said, at normal human volume, in Farsi, in the language of Hafez and Rumi and my grandmother's courtyard, and the voice I had heard in Ward 209 at 3 a.m, I said, Isa, Mamnunum. Jesus, thank you. When I landed, I fell to my knees on that airport floor. People stared. I didn't care. For the first time in my life, I could say the name of Jesus without whispering. They baptized me on a Saturday morning in April. A small Farsi-speaking church. Kilisa, we call it, the Persian word borrowed from the Greek ekklesia, meaning the called-out ones, which is a name I understood differently after Ward 209 than I had before it. Perhaps 30 people in a rented room in a community center, the kind of room that usually hosts children's birthday parties and neighborhood association meetings, with folding chairs and a linoleum floor and fluorescent lights. Yes, fluorescent lights, and yes, I noticed. And yes, I made a private peace with them because I have decided that fluorescent lights belong to me now in a way they did not before. 30 people, half of them Iranian, several Afghan, a few European Christians who had come specifically to witness, who sat in the folding chairs with the particular reverent attention of people who understand that they are watching something that cost more than they can fully calculate. The pastor, a man named Davood, Iranian, former Muslim, a man who had done his own version of the walk through the mountains 15 years earlier and whose eyes contained the specific depth of someone who has been to the bottom and come back with useful information, asked me the questions. Do you believe that Isa al-Masih is the Son of God? Then, Hamid's voice, low and slightly broken, the voice of someone who is working very hard to sound professionally neutral and failing at the edges. Chand Shab. Several nights. That was all he said. Several nights. But in those 2 words, in the way they came out of him, reluctant and wondering, like something he had been holding in a closed fist and had not intended to open, I understood everything. He had been having the dream for several nights. Not once, not a single incident to be rationalized and filed and forgotten in the category of stress-related nocturnal disturbance. Several nights. The same dream, returning with the patient insistence of something that intends to be acknowledged. I said, "Marty Safid." The man in white. The keys dropped. Not dramatically. They fell the way keys fall when a hand forgets, just for a moment, that it is holding something. Hamid picked them up quickly. The automatic recovery of someone who has been trained that sounds in this corridor have consequences. But his hand, when it came back up, was shaking. We had perhaps 90 seconds before the corridor camera completed its rotation cycle. I had tracked this obsessively across my days here, the way imprisoned minds fixate on the one variable that remains measurable. I spoke quickly, quietly, in the compressed and essential language of people who have very little time and very much to say. I told him who the man in white was. Not a lecture, not a theological treatise, just the name, Isa al-Masih. He stood there for 3 seconds more. Then he said, barely audible, "Farda, tomorrow," and he walked away. I sat back down on the cot. My hands were completely steady. I noted this with the detached curiosity of someone observing a stranger. Everything in my circumstances was identical to what it had been an hour ago. The drain, the blanket, the Article 167, counting down to its conclusion. But I was sitting inside a certainty that had no rational foundation, and every other kind, and it held me the way deep water holds a swimmer who has stopped fighting and discovered that the body, trusted, floats. What happened next took 11 days. I'm going to tell it to you in sequence, but I need you to understand something first. When I look back at those 11 days, what I see is not a chain of events. What I see is a chain of impossibilities, each one dependent on the previous, each one with a probability low enough that any honest mathematician would call it noise rather than signal. And yet they occurred in sequence, each one precisely where the previous one ended, like a path appearing under your feet one stone at a time as you walk into fog. Hamid came to my cell the next morning, not on his shift, on his off hours. He was in civilian clothes. He had brought something folded inside his jacket. He pressed it through the slot in the door without a word. I unfolded it on the cot. It was 5 pages of handwritten notes. Hamid had been writing down his dreams, every detail, the figure in white, the light, the words spoken to him. And yes, they had been spoken in Farsi. His Farsi, the Afghani-inflected Dari of his childhood in Herat, because Hamid was not Iranian. He had come to Tehran at 16 for work. The same man, the same light, the same language, the same quality of being known that I had experienced in this cell. He had written at the bottom of the last page, in small, careful letters, "Ismi in Mardchist." What is this man's name? I had already told him through the door, but he needed to see it written. He needed to hold it still on a page. I asked him for the pen. He passed it through the slot. I wrote, in large clear letters, at the bottom of his last page, Isa al-Masih, Jesus the Messiah, and beneath it, John 14:6, from memory, in Farsi, Isa bi-u goft, man ra va hakikat va zendagi hastam. Jesus said to him, "I am the way and the truth and the life." Hamid took the pages back. He stood at the slot for a moment, and I heard him breathing. Then he said, "Man komak makonam," I will help. What followed required a convergence of circumstances that I cannot attribute to coordination, because no single human being coordinated them. It required a hearing being moved to an earlier date, apparently a scheduling error, a case file placed in the wrong docket, a clerk's mistake that no one has ever satisfactorily explained. It required the specific judge assigned to my case to be replaced, 2 days before my hearing, by a different judge, a temporary substitution, the original judge having developed a sudden illness, the replacement being a man I had never heard of, from a city I had barely visited. And it required that replacement judge to look at my file, at the charges, at Brother Karimi's documentation, and to find, and this is the bureaucratic miracle, the administrative impossibility that Karimi himself apparently argued against for 3 hours in a closed session. Insufficient evidence of organized activity. Insufficient evidence of a cell. Insufficient evidence of foreign connection. The evidence was not insufficient. Karimi knew it. I knew it. The file knew it. But the file was read by the wrong judge on the wrong day because of a clerk's mistake, and the wrong judge found it insufficient. And insufficient evidence meant the capital charge could not be formally levied without further investigation, and further investigation meant temporary release pending documentation, and temporary release meant the door of Ward 209 opened on a Tuesday morning, and I walked through it into a corridor that smelled like bleach and cardamom, and then through another door into light. My father was waiting outside. He had been told 30 minutes before my release. Not enough time to prepare a response, only enough time to get in a taxi and come. He looked older. He looked like a man who had been carrying something heavy in a place where carrying shows. He did not speak when he saw me. He crossed the pavement and put his arms around me, and I felt him trembling in the specific way men tremble when they have been holding an emotion at a distance for too long and proximity has finally defeated the distance. We did not discuss Jesus on the drive home. We did not discuss Article 167. We ate my mother's food in a silence that was full rather than empty, and my mother kept refilling my plate without asking, which is a Persian mother's most complete expression of love and relief. But I knew, and my father knew, that Tuesday morning was not an ending. Temporary release is not freedom. Pending documentation is not cleared charges. In the Islamic Republic, a file that has been opened is very rarely closed. Brother Karimi was not a man who accepted a clerk's mistake as God's will. He was a man who straightened forms against table edges with precise movements and filed them for later. I had perhaps 3 weeks. The network, and I want to be careful here, not to give details that could endanger people who are still operating inside Iran, people whose courage dwarfs mine in every measurable way. The network found me through a contact I had made in those strange weeks of searching. A man I had exchanged 4 messages with on an encrypted app before my arrest. A man I had never met in person, but whose messages had been written with the particular careful warmth of someone who had walked the road I was beginning. He reached out within 48 hours of my release. He said only, "Amadegi Dari, are you ready?" I said, "As key." Since when? The route was northwest, Tehran to Tabriz by overnight bus. Sitting in the back, hood up, the bus smelling of diesel and someone's bag of dried fruits, the Alborz and then the mountains of Azerbaijan province rising and shifting outside the dark window. From Tabriz, a car, a gray Samand, the ubiquitous Iranian sedan, driven by a man who spoke very little and prayed quietly under his breath continuously, which I found, in that context, more reassuring than any briefing could have been. Through smaller roads, through villages where the architecture changed and the language on the signs shifted from Persian to Kurdish, into the mountains. The mountain crossing took 8 hours on foot. A guide, Kurdish, 50s, a man whose face had been weathered by altitude into something that looked carved rather than grown, led our small group of 4 through paths that I could not see, and he navigated by what appeared to be pure cellular memory, the knowledge of a body that has made this crossing so many times it no longer needs eyes to do it. It was February. The cold was not dramatic. It was absolute. The kind of cold that removes options, that clarifies everything to the single imperative of continuing to move. My shoes were wrong for the terrain. By hour 3, my feet had lost their specific identity and become simply 2 sources of information about whether the ground was stable. I recited what I knew of the Psalms, the fragments I had absorbed through a cell wall in a whisper. And when I ran out of Psalms, I recited Hafez because the mountains of Iran are a place where Hafez is appropriate in every condition. At hour 6, the guide stopped. He pointed. "Bale." "Yes." "Do you believe he died and rose again?" "Bale." "Yes." "Do you receive him as your Lord?" "Bale." "Yes." "Azte galb." "From the depths of my heart." I want to tell you about the cost, because I think testimony that omits the cost is not honest testimony. It is advertising. And this story is not an advertisement. It is a true account, given to you at full weight. because you deserve the full weight of it. My father has not spoken to me in 2 years. I understand why. In Persian culture, in the culture I love, the culture that made me, the culture of Cyrus and Hafez and my grandmother's courtyard and saffron rice on Friday afternoons, a son who leaves Islam does not only make a personal decision. He fractures the family's standing in a community, in a mosque, in a neighborhood. He makes his parents the subject of the specific Persian social suffering of abaru, honor, reputation, the face you present to the world, being damaged. My father is not a cruel man. He is a man navigating an impossible position between the son he loves and the world he has always lived in. I pray for him every day. I expect, with a confidence I cannot fully explain, that I will speak with him again. Mehdi, my brother, the one who found the app, the one whose borrowed phone started everything, sent me a message 8 months ago. 3 words in Farsi. No greeting, no signature, no context. Man ham mihunam. I also am reading. I stared at that message for a long time. Then I sent him back the reference, John 7:37. If anyone is thirsty, let him come to me and drink. I have not heard back yet, but I have not stopped praying. And I know something now about how prayers like that get answered. Slowly, specifically, at 3 in the morning, in the language of the person being reached. My mother calls me every Sunday. We do not discuss theology. She asks if I am eating. I tell her yes. She describes what she made for lunch. I describe what I made for lunch. We compare our respective lunches with the seriousness of scientists comparing data. And somewhere in that conversation, in the warmth of her voice crossing the distance between Tehran and Northern Europe, I feel the particular grace of a love that continues to function even when it does not understand. I miss Iran. I want to say this plainly because I think there is a narrative about people like me, about Iranian converts, about Persian Christians in the diaspora, that implies we have simply traded one world for a better one and left the old one without grief. That narrative is not true. I miss the Alborz Mountains in winter. I miss the smell of the Tajrish Bazaar on a cold morning. I miss the way Tehran is lit at night, the smog giving the lights a diffuse quality that is genuinely beautiful if you let it be. I miss Nowruz, Persian New Year, when the whole country smells of hyacinth and new beginning, when families gather around the Haft Sin table with its 7 symbolic items, when even the Islamic Republic cannot fully suppress the ancient Persian instinct toward celebration and renewal. I carry that world with me everywhere I go. It is not a wound, it is an inheritance. And I have come to understand that the God who made Cyrus the Great, the Persian king whom the prophet Isaiah called God's anointed in the Hebrew Bible, 6 centuries before Christ, the God who inspired Hafez to write poems that scholars still cannot definitively classify as Islamic or mystical Christian or simply transcendent, that God did not ask me to stop being Persian when I started following Jesus. He asked me to be the most fully Persian thing I could be. A seeker. Someone who tests every claim against reality. Someone who reads deeply and questions honestly and follows the truth wherever it leads, even when it leads to a mountain crossing at 3 in the morning in February. In Acts 17:11, the people of Berea are described in a way that has become the organizing principle of everything I do now. They received the message with great eagerness, Luke writes, and examined the scriptures every day to see if what Paul said was true. They did not accept passively. They did not reject reflexively. They examined. They brought the full engagement of their minds to the question of whether this thing was real, and they found that it was. That is what I did in a Tehran apartment at 2 in the morning with a phone screen and a VPN and a Farsi Bible app that I deleted every night and downloaded every morning. That is what I did in Ward 209 when I refused to sign the recantation form, not out of heroism, but out of the intellectual honesty of a man who had examined the evidence and could not, in good conscience, declare it insufficient. That is what I am still doing, at this table, in this gray northern light, every day. I am a Berean. I tested this faith with my life and found it true. Now I want to speak to specific people, directly, no narration, just me to you, To my Persian brothers and sisters in Iran, in Afghanistan, in Tajikistan, in the diaspora, wherever the Farsi and Dari languages have carried you, Isa is calling you, not in Arabic, not in English, in your language, in the language of your dreams. And if you have been having dreams about a man in white, you already know exactly what I am describing. And your heart is beating faster right now, and you are trying to decide whether to trust what you felt. Trust it. You are not betraying your culture by investigating Jesus. You are honoring it. The Persian tradition is a tradition of seeking. Rumi spent his entire life writing about the search for the divine face. Hafez wrote, "Even after all this time, the sun never says to the earth, 'You owe me.'" That is a description of grace. We have been circling this truth in our poetry for 1,000 years. Isa al-Masih is not a Western import. He is older than Islam. He is older than Persia. He is what every honest Persian poet was reaching toward in the dark. And he is reaching back. To my Afghan brothers and sisters, especially those under Taliban rule, I know what your checkpoint looks like. I know the sound of the call to prayer in a country where the call to prayer has become a weapon. I know what it costs to hold a different thought inside your chest, in a place that has decided thoughts are property of the state. Jesus is moving in Afghanistan. I know this not from news reports, but from the testimonies of people I have met. People who found him in compounds in Kandahar, in villages in Helmand, in Kabul, apartments with the curtains drawn. The Taliban controls the roads and the schools and the checkpoints. They do not control the hour of 3 in the morning when a man in white walks through walls that no checkpoint can stop and speaks in the language your mother used when she called you Junam. Even where the Taliban rules, Jesus is moving. I know because he found me, and he does not lose the address of anyone he is looking for. To my American Christian brothers and sisters, you live in a country where you can say the name of Jesus on a public floor in an airport, and the only consequence is that a child looks at you curiously. I say this not to make you feel guilty. I say it because I want you to feel the full weight of what you have, so that you will use it. Right now, as you watch this video, there are approximately 3 million Iranians reading the Bible in secret. 3 million people doing what I did, deleting the browser history, downloading the app again, sitting in the 2 a.m. darkness with a fluorescent light humming overhead and a question growing too loud to keep inside. They are in Tehran and Isfahan and Mashhad and Tabriz. They are in Kabul and Herat and Mazar-e Sharif. They are in the diaspora communities of Los Angeles and London and Toronto and Stockholm, still carrying the weight of a world that told them asking was dangerous. Pray for them. By name if you know names. By city if you know cities. By the general and glorious reality of a God whose network reaches into Ward 209 and speaks Farsi and knows the private prayers people prayed into their bedroom ceilings at 17 years old. Share this video. Not for the numbers, for the one person in Tehran with a VPN and a question they haven't told anyone. For the one Afghan in a compound with a dream they've been having for several nights and no name to attach to the face. For the one person in the diaspora who left Islam years ago but hasn't yet found their way to the one who left the light on for them. Be their voice, since they cannot yet use theirs. And now, if you are watching this and you have never made a decision about Jesus, or if you made one long ago and let it go cold, or if you are in a locked room right now with a VPN and a beating heart and you just want to talk to God in your own language, here is a prayer. You don't have to be in a church. You don't have to have a prayer mat or face a direction. You don't need to have your theology perfectly organized. The God who found me in Ward 209 is not waiting for perfect theology. He is waiting for you. Say this in whatever language lives deepest in you. Isa al-Masih, Jesus the Messiah, I have been looking for you, even when I didn't know your name. I have been thirsty. I come to you now. I believe you died for me and rose again. I believe you are who you say you are. Come into my life. Speak my language. I am listening. Visual, silence. Just the candles, just the light. If you prayed that, if something in you moved when you said those words, the way something moves in a room when someone you love has just walked in. That movement is real. That is not emotion. That is encounter. Write it down. Put today's date next to it. It matters. Brother Karimi asked me, in that room with the flickering light and the cardamom chai, who had told me about Jesus. He wanted a name, a network, an entry point he could map and close and dismantle. I thought about Hamid dropping his keys in a corridor. I thought about a clerk's filing error. I thought about a judge's sudden illness. I thought about my grandmother's courtyard and a fragrance that has no botanical name, and a voice that spoke in the most beautiful Farsi I have ever heard and said Azizam to Daaram, my dear one, I love you. I thought about how you describe, to an IRGC intelligence officer with reading glasses and a neatly trimmed beard, a network that operates without phones or encrypted apps or organizational charts, a network that moves through dreams, through satellite signals picked up by illegal dishes, through Farsi Bible apps downloaded at 2 in the morning and deleted at 2:15, through whispered psalms through concrete walls, through guards dropping their keys in corridors at 3 a.m. I said, Koda be man-goft. God told me. He looked at me for a long moment. The tape recorder blinked. The chai was cold. Then, Brother Karimi did something I did not expect. He removed his reading glasses from his forehead. He cleaned them slowly with his shirt. He put them on. He looked at me through them, as though seeing me slightly differently with the correction applied. And for just a moment, one moment, brief as a gap between heartbeats, something moved behind his eyes that was not interrogator and not ideologue, and not the system he served. Something older, something that belonged to him before the IRGC got to it. Then it was gone. He straightened his papers against the table edge with precise movements. He stood. He said, Feker mikonam tamum shad. I think we are finished. I did not know then what that meant. Release, transfer, something else entirely. I stood because he stood. I was still not afraid. The warmth that had come into the cell at 3 in the morning had not left me. It had simply become something I carried rather than something that visited. I walked toward the door. I once feared the intelligence ministry of the Islamic Republic of Iran. I sat in their rooms. I breathed their bleach and cardamom air. I watched their tape recorders blink. I survived their Ward 209. Now I serve the intelligence of heaven. And his network, I can tell you from direct personal experience, reaches everywhere. Even Ward 209 of Evin Prison, even a compound in Helmand, even a locked room in Tehran where someone is watching this right now on a VPN, heart beating, not yet sure what to do next. Azizam, my dear one, he already knows your name. Azizam, Tora Doost Daaram, my dear one, I love you. al-Masih. The closing image of this script, Azizam, to Doost Daaram, written in Farsi calligraphy on a black screen, is the entire thesis of the Berean Voice channel distilled to 7 words. It is not a slogan. It is not branding. It is the thing that 3 million Iranians reading the Bible in secret are looking for without yet knowing the name of what they are looking for. It is the answer to every unanswered prayer spoken into a bedroom ceiling at 17. It is what Hafez was reaching for. It is what Rumi spent 80,000 verses trying to describe. A God who knows your language, who knows your name, who came looking for you specifically, in your specific darkness, at your specific 3 in the morning, and who calls you, in the word your grandmother used when she held your face between her hands, Azizam, my dear one.